March 12, 1942. The North Atlantic is a graveyard of steel. A gray dawn bleeds across the waves as a convoy limps west of Iceland. 17 merchant ships bound for Halifax, each one carrying food, fuel, and ammunition desperately needed by Britain. Below the surface, a German U-boat stalks them. Its periscope slices through the freezing spray. Inside, diesel fumes mix with sweat and fear. The commander grips the periscope handles and murmurs one word: Feuer. Moments later, the water erupts. A British freighter, SS Dunsley, takes a torpedo amidships. Within minutes, it's gone. 51 sailors vanish into the Atlantic. On the other side of the ocean, in a soot-covered factory in Liverpool, a 29-year-old machinist named Arthur Hensley hears the news. He's standing beside a line of broken depth-charge casings, scrapped parts, twisted metal, and a clipboard full of rejections. He wipes his hands on his overalls, looks at the newspaper headline, "U-boats sink 8 more ships," and mutters, "We're sending them out to die." He doesn't know it yet, but in 3 weeks, using nothing but spare parts and a borrowed lathe, Arthur will build something no one in the Royal Navy authorized, a crude, hand-built depth charge that will help sink a German submarine and save an entire convoy. And he'll do it alone, at night, with nothing but oil, steel, and rage. Arthur Hensley is not a hero in uniforms and medals. He's a journeyman machinist, hairy-knuckled, short-tempered, and proud of the parts he turns on a lathe. He grew up in a row house 2 streets from the docks. He knows steel in his bones, how it rings under a hammer, how a bearing will fail if you're careless by 1/1000th of an inch. He's worked nights turning casings for merchant boilers for 10 years. Now the war has hollowed out the city. Men shipped away, lights rationed, and factories repurposed to feed a war machine that always seems a day behind the need. The factory where Arthur works is an arsenal of makeshift solutions. Presses, lathes, and drill stands crowd the floor. Crates of salvaged ordnance wait under tarps. The official orders are strict. Depth charges and anti-submarine devices are engineered in naval yards and tested by the Admiralty. Every charge that leaves the dock must have a stamped certificate. There is a rule book thicker than Arthur's fist and a bureaucracy that insists safety, and paperwork, comes first. Doctrine is clear. Anti-submarine warfare, ASW, is a job for corvettes, destroyers, and trained ordnance techs. Civilians don't improvise explosives. Civilians don't tinker with fuses, yet the reality at sea is raw and immediate. Convoys arrive patched and undercrewed. Escorts are overstretched. Depth charges are heavy, expensive, and sometimes in short supply. When the Navy prioritizes larger operations, requisition orders come back thin. Use what you have. The factory's inventory lists dozens of rejected casings, warped, dented, or otherwise condemned, and the chiefs stack them like unsent letters. Arthur looks at those pile of scrap and hears only one rule louder than the rest. Lives are being lost while red tape shuffles paper. That contradiction, a strict rule book on one side, and sailors drowning on the other, settles in Arthur like coal dust. He's seen what happens when a bearing snaps or a valve hangs up. He's learned to trust his hands more than a signature. If the machines at sea lack the right weight or the correct fuse timing, a depth charge either fails to detonate at the proper depth or detonates too late to matter. Those technical tolerances are what the Admiralty obsesses over, yet the difference between within spec and deadly effective can be measured in a few inches of fall and a fraction of a second in a detonator. Arthur understands that small measurements kill, and he begins to think quietly, obsessively, about whether those condemned casings are really useless at all. The problem is not theory, it's bodies in the water. Convoys keep getting cut apart. Escorts chase shadows. Radio crackles with names and positions and then silence. Family names on telegrams pile up in the dock's office. The Admiralty issues another memo. Increase ASW production. The factory answers with the same thing it's always had. Scraps, rejects, and cues. On the floor, the rejected depth charge casings stare back like accusations. They're dented, slightly warped, or stamped with a non-conforming serial. The engineers call them dangerous. The paperwork calls them unfit. The men who go to sea call them the difference between a ship coming home and a ship that doesn't. But doctrine is doctrine. If a casing fails under pressure, if a detonator goes off at the wrong depth, An escort could be lost along with the target. So certifications are strict. Every item needs a stamp. Every stamp needs a test rig. Every test needs time the Navy says it can't spare. Supplies are erratic. Fuses arrive in batches, some labeled for one model, others mysteriously short on parts. The Admiralty prioritizes destroyers and carriers. The coastal convoys get leftovers. Men in corvettes whisper about depth charges that plummet and thud uselessly into the sea, or worse, explode harmlessly too deep. Commanders tally wasted hours and wasted lives. Captain Lawson of the HMS Egerton fights back tears when he signs another death roll. He writes to the factory, "We need reliable charges. We need them now." He gets polite forms back. The human cost is precise and unforgiving. Sailors who survive a hit come back, hollowed out by the knowledge that sometimes the tools meant to protect them are the ones that fail. Wives learn to sleep with the blackout curtains drawn, not because they fear the Luftwaffe, but because they wake to the knock that says a husband won't return. The factory workers know names now. They see the faces at the funeral notices pinned to the canteen wall. They hear which ship didn't come back. The problem becomes personal, and so the tension grows. A rule book that insists on tested, stamped ordnance, and a front that needs anything that will stop a U-boat. The gap between regulation and necessity yawns wider every week. By late March, the North Atlantic has become a hunting ground. U-boats strike almost nightly. Convoy HX-181 loses 4 ships in a single engagement. Survivors float for hours among burning oil before rescue comes, if it comes. The papers call it the tonnage war. The factory men call it the slaughter. Every morning, Arthur arrives to the same site. Rows of rejected depth-charge shells collecting dust under tarpaulins, tags marked scrap. Each tag feels like a gravestone. He runs his hand across the cool metal and feels the slight unevenness that got them condemned. A dent no deeper than a thumbnail, a thread cut a fraction off center. Not fit for service, the inspector's note reads. He knows how to fix them. He's fixed worse. But fixing them isn't in his orders. One afternoon, a shipment comes back from the docks. 4 recovered charges that failed to detonate. The outer casings are intact, barnacled with salt, paint stripped by the sea. Arthur helps uncrate them. Inside, the firing pistons are seized solid. The detonators never tripped. Someone up the chain signs the report. Mechanical fault. No negligence. Arthur reads the signature, then looks at the empty forms for the next batch of replacements. There aren't any weeks pass. The factory works double shifts, then blackout shifts after air raid warnings. The machines never cool. Men sleep on benches between rotations. One night during a raid, shrapnel rips through the roof, scattering glass over the work floor. The superintendent wants production halted. Arthur and 2 others sweep up and go back to cutting fuse threads by candlelight. They can hear the sirens outside and the crump of bombs across the river. The sky flashes white through the windows. None of them speak. By April, the shortages are desperate. The Royal Navy sends word. All factories to recover and refurbish rejected stock where possible. But the directive is vague, and no one wants to sign off on dangerous work. Managers hide behind procedure. Engineers talk about tensile limits. Arthur watches the convoy's losses tick upward on the bulletin board. Dunsley, Empire Cormorant, Maplebank, Castalia. Each name tightens the coil in his chest. Then the telegram arrives from HMS Calder. Depth charge failed to detonate. Crew lost with ship. Among the missing is his cousin, Tom Hensley, stoker, age 22. Arthur reads the name twice. His hands shake. He doesn't clock out that night. He just stands on the darkened floor, staring at the stack of condemned casings and the sign that says in neat stenciled letters, "Scrap, do not use." Something inside him hardens. He decides that rule isn't going to stand another week. The night after the telegram, the factory floor is silent. The power's off for blackout. The air smells of machine oil and cold steel. Arthur stays behind long after the others leave. He lights a single carbide lamp and pulls the tarp off the stack of rejected casings. The metal gleams dully in the yellow light, pitted and bruised, like men who've seen too much and still stand ready. He rolls one casing onto a workbench and runs his calloused hands along the surface, feeling for the imperfection. A shallow dent near the base. Nothing catastrophic. Nothing that should have condemned it. The flaw isn't fatal, it's bureaucratic. He can fix it. Arthur sets to work with a hammer and dolly, easing the dent outward with practiced taps. He can hear the faint echo of the factory's heartbeat. A generator humming 2 buildings away, the clink of cooling pipes. Sweat runs into his eyes. The steel resists, then yields. The shape is true again. Next he turns to the detonator. The factory's supply has been rationed. Official units are locked in the munitions cage. But Arthur knows where the rejects are kept, those that misfired or were disassembled for study. He gathers springs, brass plungers, bearings, and washers, laying them out like bones of some half-forgotten machine. He sketches on a sheet of packing paper, calculating depth pressure, timing, and detonation delay using rough estimates remembered from overheard briefings. What he's building isn't in any manual. It's a hybrid, part factory prototype, part improvisation. The key insight comes when he realizes the faulty fuses fail because seawater corrodes the lead plugs too quickly, softening the trigger spring before it reaches firing depth. So he swaps the lead for a steel insert scavenged from a scrap pile and coats it in grease from a tractor gearbox. It's crude but corrosion resistant. He reassembles the detonator, tests the spring tension by hand, and listens. The click is crisp, immediate. He grins. By 3 a.m. the bomb is ready. A patched casing, a hand-lathed trigger assembly, and a homemade safety pin cut from a bicycle spoke. No authorization, no paperwork, just a machinist's stubborn will and a memory full of names carved into grief. He doesn't plan to tell anyone. But when the morning shift arrives, his foreman, George Latham, finds him still at the bench, covered in oil, eyes bloodshot, the depth charge gleaming beside him. George stares. What the hell is that? Arthur wipes his hands. A working one. George's face hardens. You know that's court-martial material. Arthur nods. Then I'll take the court-martial. But I won't take another funeral. That day, while supervisors argue in offices about chain of command and authorization, George quietly loads Arthur's bomb onto a lorry bound for the docks. The destination, HMS Calder, the next escort ship headed into the Atlantic. Arthur has just broken every regulation in the book. But the sea doesn't care about regulations. The sea only answers to what works. April 7th, 1942. The HMS Calder cuts through the black Atlantic, escorting convoy HX-192. The wind screams across her decks. The sea heaves and breaks in cold slate-gray swells. Her crew has been running on 4 hours of sleep in 2 days. Everyone knows the U-boats are close. They can feel it in the radio silence, in the glances of the captain scanning the horizon. In the ship's aft well, the depth charges sit ready, including one that looks slightly different. A faint hammer mark on its casing, a safety pin that isn't regulation. No one but Chief Ordnance Mate Evans notices, and even he only mutters, "Bloody patch job," before checking that the fuse is dry and armed. At 0214, the sonar operator calls out, "Contact! Bearing 210, range 800 yards, moving slow." The bridge erupts in motion. The captain orders a hard turn to port, engines at full. The ship heels over, foam streaming off the bow. The ping of the sonar grows faster, tighter. The U-boat is right beneath them. Ready depth charges. Pattern 3. Evans yanks the safety pins and signals the deck crew. 3 charges roll down the rails. 1, 2, 3, into the Black Sea. Each tumbles into the depths, white wake spiraling away into darkness. The men grip the rails, waiting for the detonations. 7 seconds pass. 8, 9, then, whump. 2 dull thuds roll up through the hull. Water plumes rise astern. But the third charge, Arthur's, keeps sinking. Its fuse is timed longer, deeper. The sonar pings go wild. The U-boat is diving hard to escape. Then the soundman shouts, "It's right under us!" At 17 seconds, the Atlantic lifts. A single enormous detonation rips through the water. The ship's stern jumps. Instruments crash to the deck. In the sonar room, the screen goes blank, then static. Evans looks over the stern and sees it, a patch of water boiling with oil, wood, and wreckage. A dark slick spreads across the waves. The smell of diesel fills the air. The U-boat has been torn open, split by a homemade bomb, built in secret by a machinist who wasn't supposed to touch ordnance. When the Calder returns to port, the report is short and dry. Confirmed kill, 1 U-boat destroyed. Unusual performance from depth charge number 42B. No mention of the dented casing. No mention of the man who built it. But word spreads fast among the crews. They say one of the charges hit like God's own hammer. They ask for more just like it. Back in Liverpool, Arthur gets a note slipped under the workshop door. Scrawled in pencil, oil-stained. Your work saved 46 men. Keep doing it. He folds it, puts it in his pocket, and goes back to his lathe. Within a week, rumors spread across the docks. Sailors talk about a miracle charge that detonated deeper, faster, cleaner, one that tore a U-boat in half while the rest went wide. Nobody knows where it came from. The paperwork lists it as experimental stock. The Ordnance Office denies any prototype. But in the pubs, men whisper the same name, Arthur Hensley, the machinist who built his own bomb. At first, the Admiralty doesn't believe it. Improvised munitions are a hanging offense, yet the Calder's kill report is undeniable. The depth reading, blast radius, and oil recovery pattern all match a perfect strike. When inspectors trace the serial number, they find it doesn't exist in official logs. Someone tampered with the records. Someone built something outside the system. And it worked. An investigation team arrives at the factory in late April. 2 officers in pressed uniforms question the foreman, George Latham. He keeps his face still, his answers shorter than his sentences. We followed procedure. No, sir, no unauthorized production. They inspect the floor, the logs, the machine tools. Everything is in order, on paper. What they don't find are the night shift offcuts, the spare detonator springs, the unrecorded casings quietly shaped back to spec. Word spreads faster than the officers can contain it. Other machinists start working late, just to tidy up. At first 1 or 2, then a dozen. Within a month, nearly every dockside factory in Liverpool, Birkenhead, and Greenock has its own after-hours improvements. No one admits anything. But the reports from the Atlantic tell the story. U-boats that once escaped now vanish under sudden, deeper detonations. Convoy losses drop for the first time in months. By summer, the Admiralty quietly changes the design specs for the Mark 7 depth charge. Officially, the modification is due to engineering analysis of field feedback. Unofficially, it's exactly what Arthur did in secret: a retooled detonator spring, reinforced casing, and corrosion-resistant insert. Arthur never gets a medal. He doesn't even get a thank you. The report on his unauthorized activities is buried in a file marked "Resolved, no further action." The officers know punishing him would spark outrage among the crews, so they let it fade. But the men at sea remember. Every time a U-boat breaks apart under the waves, they raise a toast in the mess to the dockyard ghosts. And every one of them knows exactly who. They're drinking to the stubborn factory man who refused to follow the rule book while his friends drowned in the Atlantic. Arthur never speaks publicly about what he did. After the war, he goes back to the same bench, the same lathe, the same smell of oil and steel. He marries, raises 2 children, and opens a small repair shop near Bootle. When asked about the war, he says only, "We kept things running, that's it." No stories, no boasts, but the men who sailed on HMS Calder never forget. Every year on April 7th, the night they sank U-289, a few of them send a letter or a photograph to Liverpool. Most go unanswered. One year in 1963, a parcel arrives at Arthur's shop, a brass plate, polished and engraved. It reads, "2AH from the crew of the Calder." For one bomb that worked, he hangs it quietly above his workbench, just below a faded Union calendar. Customers never ask what it means, and he never volunteers. He dies in 1982, age 70, heart attack on the job. When his son clears the workshop, he finds the brass plate still on the wall and a single oil-stained envelope tucked behind it. Inside is that note from 1942, yellowed but legible. "Your work saved 46 men. Keep doing it." Decades later, when historians review wartime production logs, they find no record of Arthur Hensley, just a line item marked "Local Modification, Non-Standard." Yet every modern depth charge built since 1943 carries his improvement: the spring, the insert, the seal. A machinist's fingerprints hidden in the blueprints of history. That's how innovation really happens. Not in boardrooms or with signatures, but in workshops after midnight, where grief becomes invention, where one man decides that doing nothing is no longer an option. So the next time you hear about the Battle of the Atlantic, remember the men who fought it with hammers instead of guns. Because one factory worker, working alone from scraps, helped turn the tide of a W.